Hey, what's up everybody? It's Lids, and we're back for some more Mardek, and last time I left you staring down whatever this thing is, and as you may have guessed, yes, in fact, this is the boss of the Dream Shrine here, and that means that before we interact with whatever it is, let's make a point of preparing ourselves for what will be, by most accounts, the most difficult fight in the game. So, let's head back to the save crystal real quick, make sure that we have access to any items we might want to throw on, and let's also talk about which party members we might want to use for this fight here. And to preview this fight a little bit, the most important things are elemental resistances. So we've talked a lot about that in the past, how we want to try to get people as high on those resistances as we can, but at times we found that, well, we want to prioritize other things like having haste on with the Yellow Fairy, of course. We've now gotten rid of that. Or getting the Scarab of Health on for some regeneration and defenses. This time, though, resistances absolutely trump everything. So, with that in mind, we will want to either make sure that we are loading up on those resistances as much as possible, or making a point of using characters such as Viridor with the Potion Spray, or Gloria with Prone abilities that can apply nulls to different people, because that is one of the best ways make sure that we are not taking elemental sources of damage, and it takes a little bit of pressure off of us from a gearing standpoint. That way we don't have to have perfect gear on absolutely everyone. And so you've heard me talk a lot about what we think each character could bring to the party if we were to include them in these big boss fights. Mardek is versatile. He can of course be a support character like he was back in Chapter 2, or in Chapter 3 has become a little bit more offensively oriented, well, with his new elemental attacks. Viridor can be very strong, although of course we do need to decide which weapon we're going to use with him in advance, and then we will be locked into that one, and that could determine whether or not he is primarily a support character with an item like the Potion Spray, or more of an offensively oriented character with something like the Flamethrower, although of course if we were to use the Flamethrower, then we would only be able to do fire elemental damage. Then we have Donovan, who is a little bit of a hybrid between a physical attacker and a magic user. He only uses fire elemental damage. You could perhaps use physical attacks and not hit the Soul Strike offensive reaction, then he could do physical damage, sure, but that's not a lot of versatility there. Has a little bit of ability to cause numbness and can put on null fire, but that's not saying much. Then we have Sharla, who is also a little bit of a hybrid between a physical attacker and spell user, though leans a little bit more towards spellcaster. She can heal, however, unlike Donovan, and also can apply null air. Zack is a strong physical attacker in particular, and has no way of dealing spell damage, doesn't have any support abilities either. Slinik is predominantly a physical attacker, although does have access to some fire elemental spells, also has the highest base HP out of anyone in our party, assuming that they're at reasonable level. Vern, technically speaking, does have a mixture of physical attacks and spells, though we've definitely been focusing a lot more on those physical attacks. They are quite potent, however they are almost exclusively light elemental, unless of course we were to throw on a different type of elemental weapon, but that's unlikely we'd go that route, and so not the most versatile in that sense. We could do some earth elemental spells, but that tends not to be what he does best. Does have the ability to heal one person, but not the entire party at once. Solar is, of course, one of the most unique party members in that they're capable of assuming astral form, which, from Resistance's standpoint, is fantastic. Getting 200% resistance to Ether, 100% resistance to physical damage, and 50% resistance to fire, water, air, and earth. Does, however, mean that Solar loses 100% resistance for both light and dark, meaning that Solar will be at minus 80% light resistance and minus 120% dark resistance, because of course they are starting out as a light elemental character. Also goes negative for both Big and Thalma elemental resistances when they assume astral form, which tends not to be a problem because there are very few enemies that can deal that type of damage, but on this occasion that could be a factor. Beyond that, Solar is another person who is a little bit of a hybrid between physical attacker and spell user, probably a little bit more of a spell user with light elemental attacks, can also use Spiritcraft to boost other spellcasters with higher spirit, and can heal and remove statuses, so versatile as well. Elwyn is another unique character in that she is almost exclusively a support character with her songs, can boost our defenses, offense, physical, magical, take your pick, though we do need to commit to one of them, can't have all those things happening at once. Then we have Gloria, who is another person who is extremely versatile. Primarily offensively, she's a spellcaster, of course, but can deal water, air, earth, and fire damage with those spells, and is our best person at putting on the nulls outside of Narrator when he's using the potion spray, so she is definitely a strong candidate as well. Then lastly, we have Legion, who is arguably our most versatile of magical users because has access to all the extremely strong water, air, fire, and earth magic abilities, as well as some ether, and if we were to throw on a Candriathope or an Evening Star, either Fig or Thalma elemental spells respectively, and that is the only way we'd be able to deal that type of damage. Does also have some dark elemental attacks, which is fairly unusual for us to have access to those. Don't have it outside of Zack's Sin Strike. So those are the options there. However, on this occasion, I think we've done a lot of leveling, mastered a lot of skills, and for that reason, I'm feeling pretty confident about where we are right now, and I'm thinking that maybe for that reason, we simplify, in a way, and say, rather than loading up on a full party of individuals, why don't we just, take a moment to say, swipe some of the better items from other people here, like Rainbow Disc that we recently picked up, and the Scarab of Health that has been quite helpful in the past. Then, from there, do we really need Narrator? Or Donovan? Or Charla, for that matter? Maybe not. Because what if we say we're to just make a point of throwing on these items here? Maybe even the Shield of Darkness. And we just give it a go with Mardek. Only Mardek. Lids, you're crazy, you say. This is the most difficult enemy in the game, and you're having only one of the possible 4 party members participate? Yes, however, it's a little bit misleading. In some ways, it is actually easier with just one person. Why is that? That is because that means that we can make a point of loading up on all of our best resistance gear on this one person here, Mardek, and he does, of course, also have access to a lot of RP because he's such a high level, and therefore can use many of his skills that he's mastered that give him elemental resistances. Let's take a close look at what we have going on here. So, in terms of inventory, we have, of course, the Champion Sword 2, the strongest sword, so we'll stick with this. Shield of Darkness, I'm throwing this on because although it doesn't have as much in the way of total resistances compared to the Glyph Shield here, it does target the dark resistances with 30% of those, and that is normally the resistance that Mardek has the least resistances to because he is light elemental. So this will help cover for that. Then we'll stick with the Golden M Helm because this is the strongest helmet in the game as long as we don't need some other kind of resistances, so I think we'll be good on this front, the high defenses and +1 to all attributes. Then we could consider swapping over to a different chest plate. However, I was saying that yes, resistances are all very important. There is one resistance that is more important than any other though, and that is Ether. And that is difficult to get on chest plates. We have this Mithril Plate Mail here has 20%, and then we also have the Astral Wanderer's Garb that has 20% as well. The Astral Wanderer's Garb is a light armor that I believe only has 6 physical defense and 6 magic defense, and doesn't give much else, whereas of course the Mithril Plate Mail also gives us a little bit of attributes, a little bit of MP, a little bit of light resistance, so I think the Mithril Plate Mail is a little bit more versatile in that sense. One other thing about this enemy we are about to face is physical defense actually doesn't matter at all. Only magical defense does, and even that has only somewhat limited use. So for that reason, it's primarily the ether resistances, yes, but that little bit light resistance is a good bonus, and the strength will actually be quite meaningful here. Then the Rainbow Disc is, of course, one of our best sources of resistances here, with 40% to everything, just about. The only thing that would perhaps rival this would be the Night Jacket, but I believe the Rainbow Disc has even more resistances than that, just a little bit less focused on the dark resistance, which is partially why I wanted to throw on the Shield of Darkness. If you were to say throw on the Night Jacket, then you may not need the Rainbow Disc, but I'll tell you why this is such a big deal in a minute. Then we have the Scarab of Health, which as long as we have enough resistances, I would say this is probably the next best item here. You could perhaps use something else to boost resistances further if you don't get to the threshold you're looking to reach. But with the defenses, it's kind of nice. As I was saying, that's not a huge deal. So in truth, it's really the regen, which has been a big difference maker when we were using this in individual people's arena runs. And also the +5 vitality, that is quite a bit. And you see there, that brings us to over 4,000 HP. So that is fantastic. So let's just take a quick look at skills here, because with our RP, primarily in the passive side, that is most important. And I'm going to focus on boosting Ether, because like I said, that is definitely the most important here. And so 50% resistance to that is huge. And then the Rainbow Aura for 20% resistance across the board. And although we would have some RP to spare here, I'm actually deliberately not going to throw on Fire, Water, Earth, or Dark. I'll talk about that more in a second. But that means that our remaining RP I will use for boosting our HP, and with 10% and 20%, as well as a little bit of vitality on top of that, we can have our HP go through the roof. And so yes, being at 4,257, that is crazy. And so why am I saying that this is good enough here from resistance's standpoint? The reason is you'll see that we have 60% at worst to most of the resistances, if not, in the case of Ether, actually as high as 130%, so we'll be healing to that. So that is huge, that we are completely mitigating and ideally healing to Ether damage. That's great. For the other resistances, the key threshold is we want to make sure that we reach at least 50% resistances to that. And we'll talk about that once we get into the fight itself as to why that's such a big difference maker there. But that is crucial. And so putting on the Rainbow Disc is one of the primary ways we're doing that. Combine that with the Rainbow Aura, and that's already 60% resistance to everything there. So just that combination alone is a huge difference maker. Then one other thing to note here is that the Rainbow Disc and Rainbow Aura do not give either physical resistance or Thalma resistance here. So we have no resistances on these two, and that could potentially be our Achilles heel. But I think that gives you a general overview of what we're looking at here. Other than that, in terms of our skills on Mardek, we're just throwing on basically any and everything that we can. He has enough RP at this point that we don't have to be too choosy. We could perhaps make a point of throwing on additional resistances here on our magic defensive reactions, though that actually is not all that relevant, and you will see why in just a minute. So let us save before we head in here. And one other thing to note is that, of course, if you are going into a boss fight like this, make sure that you're loading up on your potions. So we have a lot of big juices for as much HP restoration as we can possibly get. A few elixirs as well for full HP and MP restoration. And then beyond that, I'm also thinking that some power drinks would be very useful. Not as much for the HP restoration. 1,000 is not bad, although of course big juice is better for that purpose. But it also gives us 10 strength, so that will boost Mardek's offensive capabilities. And with Mardek being our only party member, in this case, that of course means that, well, we're relying on him for all of our damage, so boosting the strength further would be quite useful. So that's our setup coming into this fight here, and, well, bring it on. Annihilator Animus. So, you may recognize that name there. Of course, Carnos, the enemy that we fought recently, was Annihilator Carnos. So, that's another similarity between these two areas. I am the mind of the Annihilator. In life, I spoke no language. Yet here you hear my thoughts, for language is a restriction of the flesh. This world is weak. Weak worlds are craving to be destroyed. Simply craving. I am merely doing a service to the universe by ridding it of this rubbish. Tidying up. I wiped out a race, a civilization, already. What makes you think that you stand a chance against me? I shall show you just how foolish you are, daring to challenge me. I will rip you apart, atom by atom, then return those atoms to nothingness. You have no chance. Okay, so here is Animus. And yes, it was talking some trash. It is an Annihilator, so it is similar in terms of how powerful it is to Karnos that we saw previously, I would argue that Animus is a little bit more difficult than Karnos. However, we saw that because Karnos could shift elements from one to another randomly at any point in time during the battle, there was quite a range in terms of the difficulty there. If Karnos switched over to Big Elemental, which we saw for a while, then that could in some cases actually be more difficult than what we have with Animus here. So one of the difficulties with Karnos is that it is so random, whereas Animus is a little bit more predictable. So let's take a close look at what Animus has going on, and 50% resistances to most type of damage, heals to Ether, very weak to Fig. So as I was saying before, if you were making a point of using Legion and putting on a Kendrythope for a Fig Elemental Gemsplosion, then that would, theoretically, be one of, if not the most powerful ways of damaging Animus here. Completely resistant to physical damage, so that is something to bear in mind as well. With Mardek, it shouldn't be relevant because our normal attacks will be Light Elemental with the Champion Sword, but for others, that could theoretically be a factor. Then also 100% resistance to absolutely every attribute here, so not going to be able to do anything in that way. 30 defense means it's going to be hard to break through that with our physical attacks, and 10 magic defense not going to be relevant for Mardek. Very high spirit, 0 attack. So this enemy here, as I was saying before, actually will never attack us with physical attacks, will only use spells. Does also start out with both regen and haste, so this is one of those battles where, in particular if you're using one character, throwing on that degeneration 10% offensive reaction can actually be helpful. So how do we start out here? I'm thinking we actually lead off with something like our power drinks here to load up on Mardek's strength so that once we do start attacking, we are as strong as possible. We don't need the healing right now, of course, but we'll see here that most of Animus's attacks will be Ether Elemental, and for that reason, we will take no damage at all. We'll actually heal. We'll see a lot of that Soul Storm Alpha, and so that will just heal us. However, we will also see that Ion Storm there, and that is a little bit different because although it is also Ether Elemental, and therefore we will heal to it, it will lower our magic defenses. And that's why I was saying before that, sure, we will only get hit by magic spells. It would be nice to throw on some magic defenses, but ultimately those are going to head toward 0 and likely will be 0 for much of this fight here. So, I think we continue to throw on more of those power drinks there. We're going to want to load up on basically as many of those as we can early on, maximize our damage before we start trying to deal the damage. And we will see that we have, in many ways, hard countered Animus here, doing what those enemies did to Slinick back in Slinik's arena. Now, we aren't totally immune to damage here, so we aren't completely safe. And the reason for that being is because Animus is probably the smartest enemy that we've gone up against thus far. The reason for that being is that Animus will actually make a point of using only spells that will deal a lot of damage to you. What I mean by that is, Animus will use fire, water, air, earth, light, dark, Fig, even Thalma elemental spells against you, but only if you have less than 50% of that resistance. So by hitting 60% resistance on just about all these things, that means that Animus will not use any of those types of spells against us, and so that is huge. Of course, most of the other abilities are Ether Elemental, and that's why throwing on even more Ether Elemental resistances are so big. But there is one resistance that we do not have at least 50% resistances to, and that is Thalma Elemental here. So although it is rare, it is possible that we could get hit by a Thalma Elemental ability, and if and when that does happen, then brace yourselves, because that is when we could take our fair share of damage. So we do have a lot of HP here. I don't think we'll be able to get one shot. The only way we could go down here, I think, would likely be if we saw Animus do a combination of Thalma Elemental with one spell and then immediately followed it up with another Thalma Elemental spell immediately afterward. Because it does have haste, so it's going twice. But if it were to only use one Thalma Elemental ability, then of course, on our next turn with Mardek, we could use a healing potion, or Animus's next Ether Elemental spell would heal us. For that reason, I think it is quite unlikely, but it is theoretically possible that Animus could take us out here. And for that reason, I think we do have a little bit of time in which we can make a point of boosting our strength, not worrying too much about taking damage. Does also mean that theoretically we could just not hit our magic defensive reactions here, when at least we know that Animus is going to be using other elemental abilities because, well, we're just going to heal more if we don't hit those reactions. The thing is, well, if and when we do get hit by the Thalma abilities, then we want to make sure we're hitting those. So I want to make sure I'm still getting in the habit of doing it, not getting too clever, and missing the reaction when it matters most. And at this point, let's just double check what we're looking at from a strength standpoint. The Ion Storm is also, at this point, I think, perhaps already, going to have our magic defense close to 0. The other thing that it does is it reduces spirit. So for spellcasters, that can significantly hinder your ability to deal damage with those. Of course, Mardek is a physical attacker here, and we have been loading up on the strength. So we could perhaps throw on a couple more of those potions, and 100 is the cap. So that would get us at the cap. Maybe we go that right here. Probably overkill. Not sure you really need to go that high up. I mean, you could just throw on 1 or 2 and it'd be helpful. At this point, this is... yeah, it'd be nice. It'll just make this fight a little bit quicker once we do ultimately start using our attacks, because as we saw, Animus does have high physical defenses. I think it was 30. So breaking through those is possible, sure. We have a strong weapon, so it can be done. Just, we're going to have to be kind of patient. But now that we have thrown on those potions there, we'll see just how much damage we have. Okay, Mardek, so what do we have here? Almost 3,000 damage. That is great. And so, Animus will continue to use primarily those Soulstorm Alphas, as we're seeing here. So that means that we, well, like we were saying, there are not at much risk here. And if we crit, wow, we can do even more damage than that, of course. That is the one that is concerning. Energy Vortex Thalma. Use it on its first ability there. So that had me a little bit nervous there, because if Animus were to follow up with another one of those Energy Vortex Thalmas immediately afterward, then that could have possibly taken us down. It was just under 2,000 damage, so if it were to get a little bit higher on the damage roll and do 2 in a row, then we could go down. It would be close, though. Now, of course, we are not at full HP at the moment, so we could perhaps make a point of healing here. We do have Leech on our physical attack, and if we're dealing about 2,000 damage, then that does mean that it should be not full, but close to full here. What if we were to say, use a different elemental ability here? That might actually increase our damage a bit. Let's give this a shot. It actually does, yeah. That gets us back up to full HP when we leave. And now we see that it no longer says Soulstorm Alpha, it says Soulstorm Gamma. What is that, you ask? That is a more powerful version of the same ability. And so, another thing that makes Animus a very interesting enemy is those abilities there, the Soulstorms, are actually dealing ether damage that is based on a certain percentage of our starting HP. So at the beginning, when Animus is on relatively high HP, it will use Soulstorm Alpha, which deals the equivalent of 50% of our HP as ether damage. Then, as we start to deal more damage to it, it will switch over to Soulstorm Gamma. That will deal the equivalent of 70% of our HP as ether damage. Then, later on still, it will switch over to Soulstorm Omega. And what that does is it deals 120% of our starting HP as ether damage. That means that if you do not have at least about 20-ish ether resistance on a character, that ability will instantly kill you. So for that reason, yes, ether resistance at least a little bit is necessary. And over 100 ether resistance, then that means that the strongest abilities that Animus can use against us, we are dealing from. So that is why, in some ways, making a point of just using one character and loading up on the resistances on them is almost easier. We don't need to worry about splitting those resistances from our strongest items on different people and having Animus be able to pick us apart by choosing whoever is weakest against one specific element. By having everything on Mardek, that means that Mardek is almost immune. So, let's keep on moving here though. One other thing to pay attention to is that Animus will actually use an ability similar to what we've seen with other Guardians, that being that once it gets to low HP, it will throw on some shields, and if we throw on a morality block here, it will actually prevent it from doing so, because that is a light elemental spell that it will use on itself. That just means that we will not want to use any of our light elemental attacks against it, otherwise, of course, we will just burn through that null that we put on it. But we saw that it seems as though our other elemental attacks do deal more damage anyway. As long as you keep on using Soul Storms, that is no problem here. So it does mean the Ion Storms are a little bit risky, because although those are also other elemental damage, those are the ones that have reduced our magic defenses, which means that if and when Animus does use those Soul Storm Thalmas, they will deal more damage. So that's why you could sort of make a point of throwing on magic defenses, but once the battle goes on for a while, you are likely going to find that your magic defenses are close to, if not zero, as we find right now. And I think with just one or two more attacks, we should see Animus start to try to use that shield ability. There is Soulstorm Omega, so that is the ability that if you do not have at least roughly 20% other resistances of, it will just outright kill you. And it is also an ability here that we see Animus is using very often. And one of the reasons why we're seeing it use those Soulstorm abilities so often is because we threw on so many of those resistances with Mardek, because yes, he is occasionally using Energy Vortex Thalma, but we've basically locked it out of using any other element with that ability there, because we have at least 50% resistances to everything else. And we'll mix it up a little bit. We'll go with Earth Slash this time. And damage was a little bit lower. Is that a coincidence, maybe? There's the Mega Barrier. Oh, did we not null that? Did I get rid of the null? That was what we were trying to prevent it from doing. But either way, it is still on quite low HP. And we saw that we were dealing on the order of just shy of 5,000 damage. These abilities here should be cut in half by that new shield that it just put on. So, might mean that this will take us 2-3 turns here, but we're getting close. There is Energy Vortex Thalma, and it did deal 2,000 damage, so that is concerning. Fortunately, though, follows up with Soulstorm Omega, meaning that it will heal us for 500 HP. So, on this occasion, how do we feel about using attack versus healing? I think we probably play it safe here. Let's just heal up a bit with the Fig Juice, get us back up to max HP. That way, if it does use Thalma Energy Vortexes, we are still safe. Doesn't seem like that'll be the case here, though. Okay. So we should be good on that front. Then we'll throw in a Water Slash, maybe. I don't think we've done one of those yet. And one more hit should do it, and there's Energy Vortex Thalma, and that's the first of the two abilities here, so we hope that it isn't 2 in a row. It is not. That second ability will heal us. And assuming we hit our target here, we are likely capable of taking you out here, Animus. Let's go for an Air Slash, because that is not one of the ones we've used yet. And we're hoping that we leech back up to close to full HP, just in case this doesn't take you out. But it may not matter, because down you go. So there you have it. Yes, it is in fact possible to take out what would normally be the hardest enemy in the game. Yes, it may not have looked like it, but that was because we made a point of countering every special ability that this enemy had, and there was only one that could have caused problems, and we did see it on occasion, but we made a point of loading up on enough HP that even if it did use the Thalma Elemental Energy Vortexes, it would have needed to have used those twice in a row and have gotten the higher end of the damage rolls, and so it was unlikely for that to go wrong there. But now we get the Sorcerer's Soul, Scarab of Protection, an Elixir, and a Phoenix Pinion, and Animus down. So let's take a quick look at what we just picked up. So the Sorcerer's Soul is, in life, this soul was a great sorcerer who possessed the power to move the stars themselves, yet he was never satisfied because his mortality loomed over him. In seeking immortality, he managed to magically remove his soul and preserve it in this state. He feels sort of like a ball of cotton. He grants a fraction of his spiritual power to whoever equips him. So it gives Loquacity, which is actually a new ability that we've not yet seen. It's a passive ability of some variety. Then gives plus 8 Spirit and plus 100 MP. So it is somewhat similar to another soul that we got from the Carnif's fight. That one was more physically oriented, gave us some HP and strength, whereas this one here gives us Spirit and MP. Then we got a new Scarab, and Scarabs in the past have been quite effective for us, this being the Scarab of Protection rather than the Scarab of Health that we just used. So the Scarab of Protection also has 5 defense and 5 magic defense. It's a legendary artifact with amazing power. It grants the wearer the power of both physical and magical shields constantly, and defends against the elements. Oh. So it gives auto, physical, and magical shield. That is quite nice, and 20% resistances to fire, water, air, and earth, and 10% resistances to both light and dark. So that is pretty fantastic. Having the strong defenses from miscellaneous item, as we were saying in the past. 5 and 5 has been a lot on the Scarab of Health. So to have another source of that on the Scarab of Protection, that's great. The shields are quite useful. We've, at times, been making a point of trying to get those on as quickly as possible with either Mardek or even Meridor with the Potion Spray. So to get those automatically is fantastic, and with this item does mean that even if we have some enemies that try to remove those shields, can't be done, we will still automatically have it on. And then that's a lot of resistances as well. That is, I believe, perhaps the second most resistances from a miscellaneous item other than the Rainbow Disc. It would be close to something like Solar's Eclipse Amulet. But it would definitely compete because it has the strong defenses and shields as well, which the Eclipse Amulet does not have. Then let's take one last look at what exactly we can learn about that enemy that we just faced, Animus. And it is the last enemy in our encyclopedia here, because yes, it is one of the last enemies you will ever fight, because we needed all the Dream Stones to get into the Dream Shrine, meaning that we basically had to finish all other side quests, and it was, or at least would have been, one of the most difficult enemies. The Annihilator's soul was banished to the Dream Realm by the Manta, but they couldn't destroy it. As long as it existed, it could have potentially formed itself a new physical body to destroy all life on Belfan. But you put a stop to that before it became a problem. Hooray for you! So yes, it is basically the mind of a being that was once a combination of the body, Carnos, and the mind here, Animus. So you can only imagine how difficult that would have been if there was some combined form between these two. Fortunately, we only had to face the Annihilators separately. That was the last of the optional endgame content, which means that we are going to go back to making a point of picking up the last of the elemental crystals, because we actually did not pick up the earth crystal, and then we'll see where we take it from there. So, I'll catch you next time.